All right. We'll start a little bit about myself. Um, so my name is Cole Gordon, and I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I've done a lot of things in my career at this point. I was a teacher, special education, general education, all the grade levels, behavior specialist. I've designed and opened some clinics for children with autism. I was a foster parent and adopted as a single parent. Um, so yeah, I've just pretty much been working with kids for. I actually think my first babysitting job was when I was 7. So there you go. I've been working with kids for a hot minute. Um, so yeah, that's kind of who I am. You can always look me up to verify my credentials. By the way, maybe I should say that on the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. If you want to go there and make sure I am who I say I am, you're free to do that. You want to look me up under my first name, which is Gerald, because I go by my middle name, which is Cole. So anyway, here we are. Welcome back. Last week, we started talking about reinforcement, and we talked a bit about punishment. I just want to do a little bit of a recap for anybody that didn't get to see last week's video. So basically, we started out talking about punishment and what punishment is, and how, honestly, as a kind of collective society, we've really been viewing our behavior change through the lens of punishment. And so by definition, punishment is anything that follows a behavior that decreases the chance that that behavior is going to happen again. So we use punishment because we want a behavior to stop. Right. And we're like, oh, if we put this aversive thing on it, we'll get that behavior to stop. And that is true to some extent, but there's a lot of fallacies in that approach. And I don't want to go all the way down that because we did a lot of that last week. But, it basically is just not effective, and there's no long-term behavior change in it. It's sort of very disconnecting. It's not something that brings people together, And so, anyway, so we really want to start moving away from that sort of punishment based thinking. But what happens a lot when we start opening these conversations is people will say, well, how do I get it to stop then? Right. And so it's kind of a bit of a formula. And so the way that we get a behavior to stop is kind of a two-part thing. The first part is we have to stop reinforcing it. And we didn't talk about that last week, so I wanted to make sure I touched it this week. Sometimes when we think we're punishing a behavior, we're really inadvertently reinforcing it. Because if we go back to the definition of reinforcement, it's anything that follows a behavior that increases the likelihood that that behavior will happen again. And so if you're applying what you think is punishment because you want something to stop, but if that thing is getting bigger in any way, if it's increasing in intensity or frequency or duration, right, how long it lasts or how big it is, then you're not punishing it, right? And so, and sometimes when we think something that might be a punisher to me, I just assume is a punisher to others. That's actually not true, right? Because what's a punisher for me might be a reinforcer to others. And one of those things is kind of crazy it might sound to us, spanking. Spanking is one of those things that we think is always a punishment because it doesn't feel good to the body. It's painful, it's aversive, right? And we think that's definitely a punishment, right? But if you're spanking and the thing that the person is doing is getting more and bigger, in some way you're reinforcing. And if we go and look at it on a really deep level, we say, okay, what else is spanking giving? It's not just giving physical pain. It's also giving a super high intensity amount of attention, right? And so it's possible that, and I've seen this in cases, it's possible that attention that that person's getting is so powerful, they don't care about the spanking, because they're like, well, if the only time I get mom's attention is a spanking, I'm gonna see how many spankings I can get, So we just need to be really aware that if a behavior is increasing, it's being reinforced. And so if we want to stop a behavior from happening, the first thing we have to do is like make sure we're not reinforcing it, right? And then because you can't just ignore a behavior, we're going to talk about that tonight too. What happens when you actually ignore a behavior? But you have to fill that space. If you want that behavior to stop, you have to give something else. So we're going to talk a bit about replacement behaviors, which is what do I want them to do instead? And we need to start looking at all of this stuff, ourselves, others, right? What do I want to happen instead of this thing happening? Not just I want this thing to stop, because that's very, again, punishment. If we're not filling that space with something that feels better for all of us, and that's meeting that need, if the behavior is not going to stop, right? It's just going to keep getting bigger. Or if that one stops, something even less desirable is going to take its place, right? So let's talk a little bit about replacement behaviors and how they work and why function matters. On February 1st, we're going to be having the functions of behavior class. So I'm not going to get super deep in functions tonight, but I do want to talk a little bit about them because everything we do is about functions. And function means, why is this behavior happening? Not so much focus on what the behavior is. Are they hitting? Are they kicking? Are they screaming? Are they pinching? Are they whatever? Why? Why are these things happening? And I take it a little bit of a step further in my practices, where I really want to use a lot of mindfulness and be aware of my own emotions and needs that are present, so I always like check myself first. But with the other person, I really want to think in terms of what need are they getting met here? When they are doing whatever it is they're doing, that function, the purpose is need-based. There is a need that's not being fulfilled. And if we can start looking at it in that way, we can stop doing a lot of judgment. And I talked about this last week a little bit. I really tried to shift, and it's a practice, as it is for all of us, to shift from old ways of thinking to new ways of thinking. But one of the ways that I'm trying to shift my thinking when I approach, these cases that come to me, is I'll hear that so-and-so is choosing to do this. They don't need it, they just want it, right? And I'm like, that's a judgment call. I have no idea what's happening inside that person. And so from now, I operate from the foundational assumption that it's a need. And that allows me to erase all of my judgment about it and just say, wow, there's a need deficit here. What is that need? I need to know that, because how can I help them fulfill it in a way that feels better for all of us if I don't know what it is? And so that's going to be the really root of the functions class, is how do we start identifying what the need is so that we can start meeting it in that way, right? And so that's the beauty of a replacement behavior, is that, we go back to, for me, behaviors are tools in the toolbox. They're not a value system for a person. A person is never good or bad based on their behaviors, right? That's a value system that we place, and I just don't see things that way. I see behaviors as a tool. This child or this adult or this whomever has learned, here is the tool I use to get this need met, and that's all. I don't assign, oh, you're a bad person, or can you be good, or any of that. So let's really, I want to open those conversations too, to really be thinking about our language and to not be associating a person's value to the behavior that they're exhibiting, the tool that they're using to get their needs met. Let's teach them to use some different tools, again, that feel good for everyone. And so there's my little bit of soapbox on that, right? So we go back to reinforcement behaviors. Reinforcements for replacement behaviors. When we start talking about replacement behaviors, what do we want them to do instead? Sometimes we get a little bit ahead of ourselves, and we come up with, and especially if the behavior that they're exhibiting is a big behavior, we think, oh, well, a replacement needs to be a big behavior. When actually, when we go all the way down to it, there are some things that you have to have for replacement behaviors for them to work at all. Like they have to meet these certain criteria. One of those is the replacement behavior has to be, they have to already know how to do it. It has to be a skill that they already have. It's a tool that they're already using, but they're using it somewhere else, right? And so it has to be simpler, as simple or, and preferably simpler, easier than the behavior they're already doing. So for instance, if they're throwing a chair, whatever you're asking them to do instead has to require a lot less energy than that. It has to be a lot easier to function, you know, a lot easier to exhibit, right? So you have that. And then it has to, when they do the thing, it has to get the same or a bigger, if able, payoff. You know, if you're saying to me, I want you to do this behavior that's harder and it pays less, I'm a pretty well functioning grown adult. And if somebody says to me, hey, instead of what you're doing, I want you to do this thing that's twice as hard and I'm going to pay you half as much. No, thank you. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in that. Right. And so, but that's what we have a tendency to do when we start looking at behavior change and how we're approaching it. We're like, okay, I want you to stop doing this thing over here. I'd like you to do this instead. And I'm not going to give you nearly as much attention when you do it. Right. And then we're like, why isn't this working? Okay. So when we look at replacements, those things are necessary. And then the final thing that's super, super important, it has to meet the same function. It has to meet the same need. Right. And so if I'm saying to you, and since I said through a chair, we'll just stay with that. Let's say they threw a chair to, and we'll say get attention because it's an easy one for us to all talk about. Threw a chair to get attention, right? If I'm going to say, okay, actually, first what's the replacement behavior? First, you write me a sentence about how I'm going to calm down, and then I'll let you have some computer time. First of all, first you write me a sentence. You just made something, just gave one of the most difficult things for anyone to do ever, right? Ever. We all know how hard it is to get this thought into this cohesive sentence and write it down. And then what you told them they would get is computer time, which doesn't actually get attention. It's a very isolating sort of reinforcer, right? And so you didn't meet the function and you didn't make it simpler. And there's no reason whatsoever for that person to do it. But then we get surprised and we say, oh, the reinforcer is not working, right? And then we're like, okay, well, that means number one, it's not a reinforcer. We talked about that because if it's not doing the thing you want it to do, you're right, it's not a reinforcer. But if we don't match those replacement behaviors up and we don't match that reinforcement up to that need-based, then we're not actually supporting, we're not actually making a connection and fulfilling need. So we have to be super aware of those things. Okay, I'm gonna take a pause because I just threw a bunch of stuff at you guys and I got more, right? And so I'm gonna take a pause. And if anybody just like has a comment or a confusion or a question about what I mean when I'm talking about reinforcing replacement behaviors, and we're gonna go more into it, but if there's anything you have right now, or if everybody's good, you can thumbs up me and I can just keep on. What do you got, Carrie?
What if somebody is having a massive meltdown and they're throwing a chair? At that point, I would say it's anger and not looking for attention. So how does that kind of...
Yeah, so let's talk about that. And we're going to talk more about that, when to teach replacement behaviors.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, if there is a point where something becomes what people like to refer to as a crisis. For me, it's just like we've reached a point where the emotional, I no longer have the capacity to contain my emotions within my body. My brain is no longer, very, there's a word I'm looking for, y'all, but rational.
It's been hijacked.
Yeah,
That's so
my brain is no longer rational about my decision makings because my emotions have now taken over me.
Yep.
Right? And so the thing about like throwing a chair, there are some behaviors where safety is the line. And I talk about this a lot because when I talk about we don't want to inadvertently reinforce a behavior, right? The reason they got to throwing the chair is, let's say the thing about attention, the thing about any behaviors. Here's the big point where we hear old school, old school, old school. Ignore it and it'll go away. And the piece that's missing on that is it's going to be replaced with something bigger. So first the kid is tapping a pencil. And it doesn't get any attention because if we ignore it, it'll go away. And then they're banging a book. And it doesn't get any attention because if we ignore it, it'll go away. Finally, they're throwing a chair because that's the line where it's not safe. You're going to hurt somebody. We can no longer ignore you and we must attend. And what we've taught that person is, if you want my attention, throw a chair. Right? And so in the midst of throwing a chair, excuse me for a second, in the midst of throwing a chair, that's not the time. All you can do then is be in crisis response, make sure everybody's safe, physically intervene. You've given high intensity attention, which you had no choice, right? You had to intervene for safety. So if someone is exhibiting a behavior and it's a low intensity, I would so much rather you reinforce that while it's at a low intensity and the person knows all they have to do to get your attention is tap a pencil. That's not what I want to do. What I want to do is the ignore part, I want to ignore the behavior, but I don't want to ignore the person. Because when I ignore the person, that's when those behaviors escalate and escalate, right? I actually want to give them attention, but I want to give it to them in ways that feel good for all of us. And so that's where that replacement behavior comes in. And I have to be teaching those replacement behaviors way ahead of time, outside of that crisis moment, because that's not a teachable moment. When somebody is only in their fields and they're not up here, they're not receiving, information as a teachable moment. So, so that's the thing. And so when we start identifying these replacement behaviors, and we talked a tiny little bit about it last week. To use an example, we talked about a child who pinches to kind of self-regulate and help himself sleep, right? And it's like how to get something else going there, and it's like before you can block that, which you can block that, you could put on 20 layers of clothing, right? They can't get you no matter what. And then you're like, okay, we just can't do it. But if we don't actually teach something else, we're not meeting the need that is there for them. And so we have to start teaching at other times and really exploring what else actually feels good and what can I pair with that? Like what can I get it to maybe transfer to? Whereas they have the need to squeeze something. Okay, let me give them stuff to squeeze and celebrate the heck out of whatever is happening. So they start to be like, oh, this is paired with this good thing, And so then later when we're blocking, we can suggest this thing that they already have associated with, oh, this is a good thing, right? And I use the words good loosely because we all use them, but it's a very judgment term. I just mean, positive things that feel good, things that meet our needs, right? And so, yeah, our replacement behaviors are they have to be taught outside of crisis time, and they have to be reinforced, and they have to be done in a huge magnitude, lots of opportunities. We talked a little bit about potty training and how, when you first start that potty training, you want to have as many opportunities as possible so that you can have success. And so you're like, here, drink as much of this, whatever beverage of your choice that you love and you want to guzzle, you drink as much as you want. And then let me, guide you through pottying and give you positive reinforcement. Hey, this is great. Here's a toy that you like. Here's a thing that you like. Here's lots of celebratory stuff, because now we have the opportunities. That same thing applies to any replacement behaviors. You have to create the opportunities for them to be successful. If you have a student sitting in class and they're calling out and they're calling out and they're calling out, the simple replacement behavior that we all know is raise your hand and wait to be called on. But if we say to that person, here's all you have to do, and then they put their hand up and they hold it 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 up, it's not working. It's a lot easier for me to just say, hey, than it is to hold my hand in the air for 30 seconds. And maybe or maybe I won't get called on. So in the beginning, when you're teaching that, you have to right away. Oh, hey, yeah, no matter what you're doing, if that's that particular kid's thing that you're working on, right away every time, until finally, slowly, and we will fade these reinforcements, right? But at some point, you have to build it in a way that it works every single time, right? And they have to know that it works every single time, because if not, they're just going to pull out the other tool that they've been using all along. And so a little bit about when you stop reinforcing the thing you want to stop, right? You want it to go away. The thing that happens is we as human beings, we are not going to do a whole lot of work that doesn't get us anything in return. If it doesn't pay us, we're not going to just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. I'm not going to go to work every day, 5 days a week, and not get a paycheck, unless I'm just like, money is not my thing and I don't need it and I'm just volunteering my time. What I'm getting out of that, then I'm still getting reinforced in some way, or else I wouldn't be there, right? But for those of us who may be working a job because it brings in money, right? If that paycheck stops coming in, we're going to go to a different job. It's that simple. It's the same thing with behaviors. When the paycheck stops coming in, they're going to try something else. And if we can say, hey, here's something easier that pays more, why not try that? Right? And so that's where we are. And when that behavior starts to disappear, there's a little thing called extinction. People talk about extinction. And it's when you stop reinforcing a behavior, when you stop paying it, it will eventually disappear. Eventually. Now, if that behavior has been working for 5 years, it might not disappear completely in a few days, because it's there. It's a tool. They have used it over and over and over and over and over. They're not suddenly just going to stop using it. And so there's also a little thing called extinction burst that happens. And it basically is like when you stop reinforcing that thing that has worked a million times, the tendency to suddenly do it a whole bunch and bigger happens. And I'm going to give you this example I have for it. At this point, we've all used our laptop and we all know what a mouse is in relation to technology. And so when we click the mouse, something happens on the screen. Yay, we're reinforced. And we click the mouse and something happens, and we click the mouse and something happens. We click the mouse and nothing happens. What do? What's the first thing we do? We click the mouse again and again and again and again. Why isn't this thing working? That's our extinction burst, because something that's worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked suddenly stopped working. We don't immediately abandon it, right? We're like, I know this works. It's always worked. Why did it stop working? I know this works, And so we go back at it even higher intensity until we're like, oh, actually, let me just reboot this computer, you know? But we have a tendency to just like really stick with something that's always worked. So that's just a little note about extinction. So don't, and I bring that up because as you guys start to like apply these practices and you start working on reinforcing those replacement behaviors, just be aware that when you first start it, things can get worse before they get better. And the worst thing we can do for ourselves and our kids or our family or whoever we're trying to reconnect with is to reinforce it at the height of that extinction burst. So for instance, if a kid screams when they want something, right? And we're trying to work with them on use an inside voice or whatever it is we're trying to work with them on, that's a replacement behavior. They might scream even more at the beginning, and it might be even louder. And you might get to the point where you're like, I don't care, have it, just go, just have it, right? If we give in at that point, if we don't, support through that extinction burst, we have now basically intensified a behavior we wanted to go away. We reinforce it at its height of intensity. So we can expect it to now show up again, even more intense. So just knowing these little things, and you can recognize, oh, this is what's happening here right now. This is actually, they're just trying to see if it's going to work for me. And so it's so important to have that other thing that you can give them what they need because this other thing is working. And it can be whatever. I'm all about out of the box. I in no way, shape, or form do I think that one thing works for everybody. It does not. I think every single container that you're in is its own container. It's impacted by the people that are in it and the way the people that in it they show up, what their personalities are. It's impacted by the color of the walls and the temperature of the room and how bright is the lights and how big are the sounds. And it has all of these things. And so when you're in that container, one formula doesn't apply to everyone. And so it's really important to get down to what are the needs of this person, right? And what are the preferences of this person, which is the other big one for us to talk about tonight before we go into some questions and answers. When you start looking at reinforcements and what am I going to use for reinforcements? If you're working with somebody who has verbal communication, right, then please have a conversation. If they have the level to comprehend what's going on in a verbal way, please communicate. This is what we're doing. This is how I want to help you. Here is how we can help each other. I want your input. If we have someone who's cursing, right, and they're old enough to have a conversation about it, let's talk about what is it that you need, and like get information from that person about what's important to them. And so we wouldn't just say, well, here's what I'm going to give you as a reinforcer. Your reinforcer is this, and we see that a lot of times that we decide how we're going to reward, how we're going to reinforce. We make the decision all on our own. And it's this, we've decided it's this thing, We need to be communicating with that person. If they have the verbal, let's have conversations and also have the awareness that there are lots of times where I don't know what I need, right? And so if the kid is saying to you, well, I really need whatever they might think they need, listen deep, right? Because just because they say, I love Cheetos and I want Cheetos, doesn't mean that's really what they need, And so when they're saying, oh yeah, you can reinforce me with Cheetos, right? Because that happens too. First you do this and then I'll give you Cheetos. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. I love Cheetos. But if the need is really, escape, or if the need is really attention, or if the need is really sleep, or if the need is really something else, and we're giving Cheetos, you can see how we're not really making an impact. But with preferences, you want to make as big a list as possible, and you want to have things that meet the need of attention. Like something on your preference list might be plays a game. We'll play a game for 5 minutes, or we'll do whatever, because that meets a need for attention. We'll take a walk together. If it's a need for movement, make sure your reinforcements include movement. You know, if it's a need for escape, I really don't like this thing, I can really only take it in small amounts. Make sure that the reinforcer for that is escape. You know, if I have someone, let's pretend that throwing a chair was for escape, right? What if it wasn't for attention? What if it was for escape? Then before they get to the chair throwing, let's teach them a behavior that allows escape, whether that is a silent signal, which we do, because sometimes writing something down is too much. Sometimes speaking is too much, you know? So we can say, hey, a silent signal, whatever that is for you, touch your nose, touch your chin, wiggle your ears, throw your arms up, whatever. And now I know you can leave, right? And that's also, you can't just obviously leave and go wherever you want, because who knows where you are, but give them parameters, right? So I don't know if you're seeing what I'm saying. You want to have that, all of those preferences, you want to know. You want to have some things that provide for attention. You want to have some things that provide for escape. You want to have some things that provide for, is it hunger? Is it, I need movement, or whatever that is. And you can find that through conversation. But if you're dealing with someone who doesn't have that interpersonal conversation level to really communicate with you about their needs, then you start doing simpler things, which is like trying things out. Here's 3 toys. Which one do they pick up? Which one do they play with? Okay, that's the one they like the most right now, right? It doesn't have to be these super intense sort of things, but fill a room with good things and see what they go to. Okay, and that's how we can start to sort out what their preferences are. Okay, so, and I mean, you hear that called preference assessment, and it can be very, very formal. And there are some pretty formal ways to do them. But we just going through our ordinary everyday lives, I'm not going to sit down and do a formal preference assessment every time I want to get my child to do something, right? Because I've been around them long enough, I probably already know some of the stuff they like, but I'm still going to give them choices. And so when it's like, hey, first, I would like you to do this, and then I'll blah, blah, blah. That needs to be a conversation. Here's the thing that I would like for you to do. Here are some options of things that you can receive. Is there one of these that you would like better? Okay, so contingencies are really negotiations, and we'll talk about contingencies in our second class on February 8th, setting contingencies and how to do that, and in a much more need-based negotiating sort of way, because that's also an old school thing that I know I heard for years and years and years, is basically do what you're told and don't talk back. And if we're not teaching our children how to use their voice to get their needs met, which by the way is a negotiation, we're really doing them a disservice. If it's just my way or the highway, we're not teaching them to use their voice to get their needs met. And I can tell you as an adult, it's a huge detriment when you can't use your voice to get your needs met. Okay, so that is a huge chunk of what I have for you guys tonight. Like I said, I wanted to leave a nice bit of spaciousness for anybody who has any questions about what we talked about, or if you have a particular situation you would just like some gentle guidance on without going too deep, obviously, which we can't in this space. But if you just have something that you're like, could you just shift my perspective maybe a little, then I'm open to receiving that. So the floor is open for you guys to comment or contribute or question. Gary, don't hold back and feel like you're the only one.
I'll go. I don't want to
I
take.
felt you. I felt Carrie holding back, y'all.
I don't want to take up Jennifer's time or anyone else's. Anyone? All right, I'll just ask a quick one.
You're fine. You're not taking my time at all.
Okay, I didn't want to take your space if you needed to talk. Yeah, so let me try to think of something kind of light. So when my son gets home from school, he is bonkers. And he has ADHD.
Okay.
And I'm sure his meds are wearing off at that point. Or maybe it's just, because I even asked him today, I said, are you just really happy to be home? Or do you feel like your medication's wearing off? And he's like, I don't know. Maybe a little both, because he really doesn't know how to tell when his medication's wearing off.
Mhm.
I don't think he feels it, but it's very difficult. And it's very much stuff that physical, like super, but stuff that's like annoying, like patting me on the backside or just climbing on me, and also being ill-behaved, throwing his coat down and not picking it up, grabbing cookies he's not supposed to eat, just very, 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 very ill-behaved. And it's really, it's almost like a hurricane when he comes in. It's tricky. And I find myself getting upset. Because he's like a force of nature.
Mhm.
And normally I keep a poker face for like all our other behavioral stuff. I'm pretty good at not showing, but this case I do get a little annoyed, like, because it's just a lot. So I wondered if you maybe have a suggestion
Well,
for.
and again, like I say, when I say gentle guidance, it's obviously because I immediately have like a million questions to clarify, right?
I know I don't have
So,
time for that. I apologize.
I know, because that's just like how my brain works. I have so many things to ask. But
Yeah.
if you can get down to what you're telling me in a nutshell is that he is doing a lot of touch-based things,
Yes.
right? And he's doing a lot of movement. And he's just like, and especially when you're like, oh, and he's getting cookies he's not supposed to have, and that sort of thing. It's like, it sounds to me like he's got some needs of his body that are just kind of overtaking him.
Yeah.
And I have seen, I'll tell you, like, I could get on my soapbox about kids identified with ADHD or emotional disabilities.
Mhm.
Because I do feel like they get a bad rap, they're really having to do so much body regulation, and especially if they go to school all day and if they take a medication that's really helping them. It's like when they finally get home from school, they've held it together and held it together and held it together. And it is just like, I am now safe and I can no longer hold it together, right?
Yeah.
And so then it becomes your challenge to find replacement behaviors.
Okay.
Right? It becomes your challenge to, how can I get the movement that they need? How can I provide the touch that apparently they need? Because they're doing it. They're telling me they need it. Is it, is there hunger? Or is there, I will tell you that a lot of times, for me personally, having worked through many of the issues that our children are working through, I recognize that my body doesn't always know the difference between hunger and anxiety. It often thinks it's the same thing. It's the same feeling in my body. It gives me the same sensations in my stomach. And I really have to go, am I anxious right now or am I hungry? And so when I know things like that about myself, and when I pay more attention to things like about how my own personal body is responding and where I'm feeling feelings, so that's also a little bit for you to do. Anytime that you're feeling feelings, you have a need that's not being met. And so it's, how you're on a plane and they give you that whole spiel and they're like, make sure you put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others. It's the same thing. So when you're walking into the situation and you feel yourself you're like, right? You have a need that's not being met. And what is it? And that's a piece of your communication. When you're communicating with someone,
Mhm.
especially who's a family member, because family members tend to be reciprocal relationships. Right? So it's basically, I'm supporting and guiding and reinforcing you, and you're supporting and guiding and reinforcing me. And so if we go really deep here, Carrie, something is that the way that he is behaving is not reinforcing you. Right? So, yeah. And so in the midst of that situation, recognize his behavior is not in isolation, right? And how is it making you feel? And once you can check into that first, you don't do any projection onto him because he already can't hold his own. And then feeling yours is probably another layer where he just gives it back to you times 10, you know? And so,
Yeah. I would say I feel uneasy, almost like he's a loose cannon,
mhm.
and I don't know and he's so unpredictable, and he's
So I do challenge you to try to identify some replacement behaviors when he walks in the door.
Mhm.
You know, all structure doesn't have to disappear. It's actually helpful to have some structure, and he knows, oh, I'm going to walk in the door and
Okay.
X, Y, and Z is going to be available for me. This movement activity is going to be available for me. This place to just like go in a room and scream if I need to is going to be available for me. A
Mhm.
way to express this stuff is going to be available for me, you know? Because I think you told me he's 9.
He's
I
9.
think, right. So he is in a beautiful place. Like he's entering this place where he's really going to start recognizing that the things that he does has an impact. And he can start that negotiating process with like taking care of his own needs and monitoring his own behavior. Anytime I get called in for anybody that is verbally and cognitively capable,
Mhm.
if I'm in a school system and we're doing a plan, I have that kid self-monitor all the time because I want to raise their awareness of what they're doing and what they really need.
Hmm.
Right. And so I'll have them like, when the teachers tell me I really need this kid to start their work in less than 20 minutes, right? I put that kid on there and it's on their list and it says, I will start my work within 2 minutes, and I give them a timer. And then the teacher's bonus pointing the heck out of them. And we're all being like, yay, way to go, da, da, da. And look, you got your 5 checks and now you get to actually escape, which is what you want to do anyway, you know? And so it's that kind of thing, raising the awareness of children that are able, they're at that capacity, you know? And then otherwise it's really on the person providing the support to help them recognize what the needs are and how to give them a tool that will get the need met in a really, feel good kind of way.
I feel like he's definitely delayed. He's 9, but he's like a younger 9. He's more like 7. I think he's a 2 years delayed emotionally and stuff. So I'd love to explore that concept of self-monitoring, and if time allows, I'm curious as to what that means. Is it something they fill out on paper, or is it just
It's really what works for you guys. It could be a conversation. It could be, and then, again, this is one of those things that you don't use in the crisis. You start these conversations, just like you said to me a few minutes ago. I don't think he knows how his body feels on medicine.
Mm-mm.
Then let's invite that conversation with him. Let's
Mhm.
invite him to start checking in. Hey, I'm, and that's the conversation too. Like, I'm transparent with my conversations. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat what we're talking about. I'm concerned that you don't know how your body feels on medicine. You
Or
can't
when the
tell me
medicine
when,
wears off.
yeah, you can't tell me when it's wearing off. So let's do some exploring. Let's do some detectiving. Let's solve this mystery.
Mhm.
Okay, you take it at 7 a.m. Can we do a body check at 7:30? Can we do a body check at 8:30? And what does that body check mean? Am I sitting still and I'm thinking to myself, do I feel something vibrating? Do I feel something hurtful? Do I feel myself at all? Can I even feel my toes when I try to? That sort of thing. Can you focus on it? So it's that sort of and you can research body scanning and stuff like that. And so it's that kind of like getting him to start being aware of his own body, and then he can eventually say to you, oh yeah, I noticed that my body starts to feel differently around this time of day, you know?
That's very interesting. I think even as an adult, I'm not aware of how I'm feeling until I actually stop and
Mhm.
until you read about these things that says you should learn how you feel and think of.
Agreed. Well, I know that I always, as a younger person, thought emotions were very abstract, right?
Yeah.
I thought when we say, oh, we love in our heart, it wasn't really this physical thing. It was that elusive heart out there somewhere floating around where the emotions are, right? But I've come to realize that we call them feelings because our body feels them.
Yes, they do.
And if we stop and pay a little bit of attention to our body, it'll tell us, oh, I hold my trauma in my lower back. Oh, every time I'm upset, my right arm really hurts. Oh, you know, so we start to notice if we actually can start paying attention to our bodies. There's a lot about there about somatic experiencing, SOMATIC. And that is, it really talks about that, like the symptoms of the body are expressing. There's tons of books, The Body Keeps Score.
I was gonna say the body keeps the score. Yeah. Is that vessel?
And it does. And so, yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing as you start to do these practices with your children, it's back to that oxygen mask. When you do them with yourself and you see the value, you're so much more able to communicate with others.
Yep.
You know, as opposed to like, here's something I heard about, but I didn't actually do it, but I think it'll be good for you. Right? I like to taste the medicine before I ask anybody else to taste it. You know, so
That's true. And I like your plan about having, I've often thought I should have something structured for, because when he comes home, he has a break for an hour. And that break between homework and school, coming home is very, it's almost manic and it's unsettling.
His
So
body needs to do something, but he doesn't have, right?
it's not-
It's like, oh, there's all this space. Sometimes space can be incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah.
And we think that, like, we'll walk into a space that's really big and it's suffocating. The sound of that space is very heavy and it just creates this like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do in this space.
Yeah.
You know,
I'll try to think of some things I could do to maybe rein him in a little bit.
yeah, I actually think I would look for some things that don't rein him in.
Oh, okay.
Right? You want to take that energy is trying to come out.
Okay.
It's trying to express. He held it in. We don't want to give him something that says, okay, this is going to help you hold it in. We want to give you something that says, hey, this is going to help you get it out in a better way.
Oh, I see what you mean. That's what I meant, but I
okay, yeah.
Yeah, a way to channel it. How's that? That was
exactly.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you very much. That's super helpful.
Oh, you're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Jennifer, Militia, I see you here. Somebody iPhone. Anybody have any questions or? Jennifer, where are you from?
Covington, Virginia.
Oh, sweet. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a lead teacher at the YMCA here.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You have any, like, we've got a little time. If you have anything that's you want us to poke at, we're happy to do so.
I use a lot in my classroom. I use a lot of for my expectations, when then conversations. And that really helps, and just setting like very clear expectations with what I want them to do. And then if that's not being met, I do what I like to call time ends, where like we kind of, you know, take a break from everything that's happening, and then me and them will just sit down and like have a conversation about what's happening, how they feel. You know, we have feelings charts in the room and stuff, and I have a little cozy corner we can go to and just kind of like check in with each other, like what's happening. those types of strategies for behaviors in my room. I don't really have a lot of behaviors in my room, to be honest.
Well, if you're functioning, right, like you're describing on a contingency based,
Yeah.
that's the thing. You're already setting them up for connection and success and
Right.
reinforcing the positive things, you know, as opposed to just perseverating on the negative things.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Anybody else tonight? Okay, then I guess we will wrap it up a little bit early, which is fine. Like I said, we're starting our series of courses on February 1st. We'll be starting with functions of behavior, which we talked a little bit about tonight, and then you can look up all the stuff that's coming after that. And I was like, and Carrie made me think of something. Maybe I'll think about where I want to throw in something more in depth on self-monitoring, because it is a powerful tool, you know, as our kids gain their voices. So
That sounds great. Thank you so much. This is so
Mhm.
helpful.
For sure. Thank you.
It really is.
Well, hopefully I will see you guys
I hope so.
in a couple of weeks. And,
My son has a chorus concert and I don't know what to do.
well,
at
that's
that-
okay. Remembering that, so for all of the future classes, which are paid classes, you'll get, so this recording will also be put up like the other one was, so that you can review it. But
Mhm.
the ones for the paid classes, you'll get the link to the private recording, even if you aren't able to attend the class.
Oh, good. Okay.
You'll still get you don't have to be here. We'll send you that. And those will go out via email. They won't be posted on the website as far as the link.
Okay, great.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah, thank you guys. Everyone have a beautiful night. Please, if you enjoy us, please comment and share. And we really want to get some widespread, we want to spread this information. So thank you so much.
Good.
See
Okay.
you soon.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.